In a luxurious Manhattan penthouse, a millionaire lives by the rules of absolute control and silence. After a business event, he returns home but is interrupted by a strange sound coming from the library. There he finds the housekeeper's daughter, reading an advanced physics book. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. Silence had always been sacred to Harrison Sterling Blackwood. Not the ordinary silence of normal people, but that absolute heavy silence that only money can buy. On the 40th floor of the most luxurious building in Midtown Manhattan, his triplex penthouse was a temple dedicated to control. Every inch of that space had been designed to remind everyone, including himself, who was in charge there. Through the floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass walls, the city of New York spread out like a carpet of lights. Harrison enjoyed observing that view, especially at night. From up there, people looked like ants, and this vision fed his deepest philosophy of life. The world was divided into two very simple categories, those who take and those who are taken from. He obviously belonged to the first category, and he made sure everyone around him knew it. On that Tuesday in March, Harrison was returning from another triumphant day. A lunch at the Plaza Hotel had sealed a deal that would increase his net worth by several million. Not that he needed the money, but the pleasure was in the conquest, in the act of dominating, of showing that he could have whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. At 52, he had built an empire that spanned several sectors: real estate development, mining, agribusiness, and more recently, technology. The private elevator took him directly to his floor, and the soft sound of the doors opening was like music to his ears. Finally home. Finally his sanctuary of silence. He took off his Armani jacket and left it on the Italian leather sofa, then loosened his Hermes tie. His footsteps echoed lightly on the Carrara marble as he headed to the bar to pour himself a whiskey. A 25-year-old Macallan, of course. Nothing less would be worthy. Guy celebrating another victory. Harrison brought the glass to his lips and felt the amber liquid burn gently down his throat. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring not only the whiskey, but the sweet taste of success. This was his moment, his sacred time. The moment when he could simply exist in his perfect universe, far from common people, far from the mediocrity that infested the world below. That's when he heard it. A click. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely real. Harrison opened his eyes and frowned. He knew every sound in his home like a conductor knows. His orchestra, the discreet hum of the central air conditioning, the almost inaudible buzz of the imported refrigerator in the kitchen, the slight rustle of the automated curtains when the wind hit the windows. But that click was different. It was foreign. It was unacceptable. He placed the glass on the marble counter with more force than he intended, producing a sharp sound that cut through the silence. His eyes scanned the room. The living room was impeccable, every object in its designated place. The paintings by renowned artists remained perfectly aligned on the walls. The polished bronze sculptures reflected the soft light of the crystal chandeliers. Another click. This time Harrison could identify the direction. It came from the library, his private library, where he kept first editions of rare works, business books that shaped his philosophy of life, and some volumes on physics and mathematics that he collected more for status than for real interest. No one was supposed to be there. No one was allowed to enter that space without his express permission. He felt irritation grow like a wave of heat rising in his chest. Who would dare violate his rules? His mind immediately went to the cleaning staff. Most of them had already left, but he vaguely remembered that one of the employees worked the night shift. What was her name again? Maria? Marissa? It didn't matter. What mattered was that someone was disrespecting his most basic rules. Harrison walked toward the library with firm steps, each footfall echoing his authority. He did not like to be contradicted, and he definitely did not tolerate insubordination in his own home. He approached the carved mahogany door and opened it with a sharp movement, prepared to find a negligent employee meddling where she shouldn't. What he saw, however, made him stop in his tracks. In the farthest corner of the library, Partially hidden behind the antique globe he had bought at an auction in London, a small light flickered like a lost firefly. It wasn't an adult employee, but a child. A girl who looked to be about 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in reading a thick book resting on her lap. The light came from a small keychain flashlight she held in one hand, illuminating the pages. For a moment Harrison was speechless. It wasn't fear or surprise, but a kind of perplexity. The child showed no sign of guilt or nervousness. On the contrary, she seemed completely at ease, as if it were the most natural place in the world for her to be. "What are you doing here?" Harrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The girl looked up from the book, and for the first time Harrison could see her face clearly. She was a girl with brown skin, her curly hair tied in two simple pigtails, wearing basic but clean clothes. Her eyes, however, were what caught his attention the most. They were large, dark, and had a disturbing intensity for someone so young. There was no fear in those eyes, only a disconcerting calm. "I'm reading," she replied simply, as if the answer were obvious. Harrison felt the irritation grow. "Reading? You shouldn't be here. This is a private area, and children are not allowed to—" His words died in his throat as his eyes focused on the cover of the book the girl was holding. In gold letters on a navy blue background it read, "Principles of Quantum Mechanics, a Modern Approach." It was one of the volumes he had bought years ago during his phase of trying to appear more intellectual. He vaguely remembered trying to read it in college and giving up after a few incomprehensible pages. "What?" Harrison swallowed hard. "What are you doing with that book?" The girl glanced at the cover, as if she had forgotten which book she was reading. "Oh, this one. It's interesting, but I'm still having trouble with some parts." Harrison laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "Trouble? You're what, 9, 10 years old? And you want to tell me you understand anything in that book?" "Most of it, yes," she replied with the same tranquility as before. "But I still have problems with the Copenhagen interpretation and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. They are concepts that require a deeper understanding of the nature of reality." Harrison's world seemed to tilt slightly. He blinked several times, trying to process what he had just heard. A 10-year-old child had just mentioned concepts he could barely pronounce correctly, and she spoke about them as if she were discussing the weather. "That's impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The girl shrugged. "My grandfather always says that impossible is just a word people use when they don't want to. Try to understand something. Who is your grandfather? And more importantly, what are you doing in my library?" "My grandfather is Sebastian. He teaches me a lot of things, and I'm here because—" She hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to continue. "Because I like to read, and this library has books I've never seen before." Harrison felt something hot rise in his chest. Not just irritation, but something deeper. This child was violating his space, his rules, his order. And worse, she was doing it with a naturalness that infuriated him. "Where is your mother?" he asked, trying to regain control of the situation. "In the kitchen, polishing the silverware. Of course, the cleaning lady's daughter. That explained everything." Harrison felt relieved to finally understand the situation, but also more irritated. How dare that woman let her daughter roam freely through his home? "Didn't your mother teach you that there are places you can't go?" The girl closed the book carefully, marking the page with a slip of paper she took from her pocket. "She said the library was a special place where we shouldn't touch anything, but I'm not touching, I'm just reading. Reading books that aren't yours, using my light, occupying my space." Harrison took a step toward her, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "You and your mother don't seem to understand what your place is here." For the first time, something changed in the girl's face. It wasn't fear, but a kind of focused attention, as if she were paying attention to every word he said. "What is our place?" she asked, and there was something in the way she asked the question that bothered Harrison. It wasn't innocent curiosity, but something more calculated. "You are here to work, to serve, to keep my house running the way I want it, not to use my things, not to behave as if you own the place." Harrison felt himself swell with his own words. It felt good to reaffirm the natural order of things. The girl nodded slowly, as if processing important information. I see, so there are people who serve and people who are served. Exactly. That's how the world works. Always has been and always will be. She stood up gracefully, tucking the book under her arm. She was small for her age, but there was something in the way she moved that was almost adult-like. And you are in the group that is served, obviously. Why? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean, why? Why are you in the group that is served and we are in the group that serves? Harrison laughed again, but this time the sound came out a bit forced. Because I worked to get where I am, because I was smart, because I made the right decisions, because I knew how to seize opportunities. And my mother doesn't work. Of course she works, but... And my grandfather, he fought in the war, worked his whole life building houses. Doesn't he work? Harrison felt irritated by the line of questioning. Look here, girl, the world isn't fair. Some people are born with more talents, more opportunities. Others are born to serve. It's the natural order of things. The girl nodded again, but there was something in her eyes that bothered him. It was as if she were memorizing every word. The natural order, she repeated slowly. Exactly. And now you will leave my library and tell your mother that the conversation we had today will be the last time this happens. Understood? Understood perfectly. She walked toward the door but stopped as she passed him. May I ask one more question? Harrison sighed. You may. Do you remember what you were doing when you were my age? The question surprised him for the second time. What does that have to do with anything? Just curious. Harrison thought for a moment. Playing, I imagine. Watching television, kid stuff. Reading books on quantum mechanics. Of course not. Then maybe the natural order isn't so natural after all, she said softly, and left the library before he could respond. Harrison was left alone among his shelves, staring at the spot where she had been sitting. There was something disturbing about that conversation, something he couldn't identify. That girl was not normal. Normal children didn't read physics books, didn't ask philosophical questions, didn't stare at him with that disconcerting tranquility. He heard hurried footsteps in the hallway, and moments later, a woman appeared at the library door. She must have been in her early 30s, hair tied in a simple bun, impeccable work uniform. Her eyes were wide with terror. Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry. Abigail shouldn't have been in here, I told her to. Stay in the kitchen while I finished my work, but... Abigail, Harrison repeated the name. Until that moment, the girl had just been the cleaning lady's daughter. Now she had a name, an identity. Yes, sir. My daughter. She's very curious, always has been, but I promise it won't happen again. Please don't... What is her name? Her full name. The woman hesitated. Marissa, sir. Marissa Davis Jones. And my daughter is Abigail Davis Jones. Abigail was reading a quantum physics book in my library, Marissa. Marissa's face turned even paler, if that was possible. She's always been like this, sir. Since she was little, she's always wanted to read everything she sees. My father, her grandfather, taught her to read very early, and she hasn't stopped since. But I promise it won't happen again. Does she understand what she reads? Marissa seemed surprised by the question. I believe so, sir. She's always been able to explain everything she reads, even things I don't understand. The doctor at the clinic said she's special. Special how? Gifted, sir. Photographic memory. She remembers everything she sees or reads in detail. Sometimes it even scares me a little. Harrison felt something. Cold run down his spine. Photographic memory. Remembers everything she sees. That information echoed in his mind in an unsettling way. How long have you two been working here, Marissa? 3 months, sir. Since December. 3 months. 3 months, during which that child with a photographic memory had been in his home. 3 months during which she could have seen anything. Where did she stay while you worked? Always in the kitchen, sir. She would bring her school books and do her homework there reading. I swear I never knew she was coming here to the library. If I had known, I would have stopped her immediately. Harrison nodded slowly, but his mind was racing. School books. A 10-year-old didn't read quantum mechanics books in school. What else had she read in his house? What else had she seen? "Marisa," he said, and there was a new coldness in his voice. "Gather your things. You're both dismissed." The woman's face fell. "Mr. Blackwood, please. I need this job. I have a daughter to raise, and this job is the only income I have. Please, give me a second chance." "There are no second chances when it comes to a breach of trust," Harrison replied, repeating a phrase he had used many times in his business dealings. "But sir, she was just reading. She didn't touch anything, didn't break anything." "She broke the rules. You both broke the rules. And in my world, those who break the rules pay the consequences." Marisa began to cry silently, and for a moment Harrison almost felt something akin to remorse. Almost. But then he remembered the girl's eyes, the way she had questioned him, the disturbing calm with which she had absorbed every one of his words. "You have 15 minutes to leave the building," he said finally. Marisa nodded, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and left the library, heading toward the kitchen. Harrison heard her call for her daughter, heard low voices and movement. 15 minutes later, silence reigned once more in his penthouse, but it was no longer the same silence as before. There was something different now, something that bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. He went back to the bar, poured another whiskey, and tried to recapture the feeling of triumph he had felt earlier. But the image of that girl wouldn't leave his mind. The dark eyes, the disconcerting tranquility, the way she had absorbed every word about the natural order of things. Photographic memory, her mother had said, remembers everything she sees. Harrison drank the whiskey in one gulp, feeling the alcohol burn more than it should. He shook his head, trying to push away the unsettling thoughts. They were just a cleaning lady and her strange daughter. Nothing that could affect his perfectly controlled world. Down below, on the street, Marisa and Abigail walked toward the bus stop, carrying a small bag with the few belongings they had brought. Harrison watched them from the window, two small figures moving away under the light of the street lamps. In a few minutes they disappeared into the city's crowd. But if Harrison could have heard the conversation mother and daughter were having at that moment, he might not have slept so soundly that night. "Mom," Abigail said as they waited for the bus, "do you remember what Grandpa always teaches us?" "What, my dear?" "That every action has a consequence, and that sometimes the consequence takes a while to arrive, but it always arrives." Marisa looked at her daughter with a mixture of worry and curiosity. "Why are you saying that, Abby?" The girl looked up toward the 40th floor of the building that rose against the night sky. "Because today I learned a lot about the natural order of things." The bus swayed through the streets of New York as Marisa and Abigail headed home to the Bronx. The mother stared out the window with red-rimmed eyes, still processing the humiliation and the loss of her job. Abigail, beside her, seemed strangely calm for a child who had just witnessed her mother being fired because of her. "Mom," Abigail said softly, "you don't have to. Blame yourself." Marisa turned to her daughter. "Of course I do, Abby. I should have kept a closer eye on you. I knew you were curious, but I never thought that I would go into his library, that you would read a quantum physics book like it was a comic book." Marisa sighed. "Sometimes I forget you're not a normal child." Abigail was quiet for a few moments, watching the city lights pass by the window. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Of course, my dear." "I didn't just go into the library today." Marisa felt her stomach clench. "What do you mean?" "For the last 2 months, whenever you were cleaning the upstairs bedrooms, I would go to the library. I've read a lot of books from there." "Abigail." Marissa's voice came out as a whisper of despair. "But that's not all. I saw other things too." Something in the way her daughter said that made Marisa turn completely toward her. "What kind of things?" Abigail looked around the bus, making sure no one was paying attention to their conversation. "Papers in the office, phone conversations, meetings. Mr. Blackwood has a lot of important people over." "Abby, listen. To me very carefully," Marisa said, holding her daughter's arm gently. "Everything you saw or heard in that house must stay between us. People like Mr. Blackwood are powerful, and they don't like it when other people know about their business. I know, Mom, but what if his business isn't right? Marissa felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean by that? I'd rather talk to Grandpa first. He understands these things better. The rest of the trip passed in silence, each lost in her own thoughts. When they finally arrived at the small two-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, they found Sebastian waiting in the living room, sipping his nightly chamomile tea while watching the news. Sebastian Jones was 68 years old and bore the marks of a life of hard work and difficult experiences on his face. He had served in the U.S. Army during World War II, then worked for decades in construction, always maintaining the dignity and principles the war had taught him. His eyes, the same dark and intense shade as Abigail's, lit up when he saw them enter. "You're home early today," he observed, but soon noticed the expression on Marissa's face. "Did something happen?" Marissa sat down heavily on the sofa next to her father. "I lost my job, Dad." Sebastian turned off the television and turned completely toward them. "What do you mean you lost your job?" "It was my fault," Abigail said, sitting on the floor at her grandfather's feet as she always did when she wanted to have a serious talk with him. "Tell me everything," Sebastian said, and there was something in his voice that conveyed both authority and protection. Abigail told the whole story, from her secret visits to the library to the confrontation with Harrison. As she spoke, Sebastian listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. When she finished, he remained thoughtful for a few minutes. "And what else did you see in that house besides the books?" he finally asked. "A lot, Grandpa. Strange meetings, papers with names I recognize from the news, conversations about money coming from places that don't make sense." Sebastian exchanged a meaningful look with Marissa. "Abby, do you remember the details?" "I remember everything, Grandpa. Every word, every paper, every person who came in and out of that house." "This could be dangerous," Marissa intervened. "Maybe it's better to forget all this and move on." "Marissa," Sebastian said gently, "in the war I learned something very important. When you see something wrong happening and do nothing, you become part of the problem. But Dad, we're talking about a very powerful man. He could hurt us." "And that's exactly why we can't let it go," Abigail said, surprising them both with the maturity in her voice. "Today he humiliated us because he thought he could, because he thought we were invisible, that we didn't matter. But what if he's done this to other people? What if he's doing worse things?" Sebastian smiled for the first time since they had arrived. "My granddaughter is right, Marissa. Sometimes the little people are the only ones who can bring down the giants." "What do you mean?" "Because the giants never pay attention to the little people, and that can be their greatest weakness." Over the next 2 weeks, Sebastian's home transformed into an informal investigation center. Every evening, after Marissa left for her new temporary job cleaning a doctor's office, Abigail and her grandfather would sit at the kitchen table with notebooks, pencils, and the girl's prodigious memory. "Let's start with the people," Sebastian said on the first night. "Who did you see visiting the penthouse?" Abigail closed her eyes and let her memory flow. "Councilman Fields. He would go there every Tuesday at 8 p.m. He always brought a black briefcase and left without it." "Interesting. Who else?" "Ms. Victoria Mendez, the one on TV who talks about public works. She went there 3 times last month. They always argued about a place called Project Aurora." Sebastian carefully wrote everything down. In the following days, they researched each name on the internet using a neighbor's borrowed computer. Gradually, a pattern began to emerge. All of Harrison's regular visitors were people involved in decisions about public contracts, bidding processes, and project approvals. "Grandpa," Abigail said one night, "do you think Mr. Blackwood is buying these people off?" "It seems so, my dear. But suspecting is one thing, proving it is another." "What if I can get proof?" Sebastian stopped writing and looked at her. "How?" "I remember many things I saw in his office, papers, names, numbers. Maybe if we research them, we can connect the pieces." Thus began the real investigation. Abigail spent hours reconstructing every document she had seen, every conversation she had overheard. Sebastian, with his life experience and knowledge of how the real world worked, helped interpret the information. They discovered that Project Aurora was a proposal to build a public housing complex in the Soundview neighborhood of the Bronx. The project had been approved with suspicious speed, skipping several steps of the normal bidding process. The winning company? Blackwood Construction, a subsidiary of Blackwood Holdings. "But that's not proof of corruption," Sebastian observed. "It's suspicious, but it's not proof." "Wait, Grandpa, there's more." Abigail remembered a specific conversation she had overheard while hiding in the library. Harrison was on the phone with someone talking about adjusting the numbers to make the project seem more expensive than it really was, allowing for over-invoicing that would be split among the involved parties. "If we can prove that," Sebastian muttered. "I know exactly where the documents are," Abigail said. "In the safe behind the Pollock painting in the office. I saw him open it several times. But how are we going to get to it? He'll never let you in that house again." Abigail smiled, and for the first time in weeks Sebastian saw in his granddaughter the mischievous child she also was. "Who said we need his permission?" The next morning, Abigail put a plan she had been developing into action. She put on her neatest school uniform, combed her hair carefully, and headed to Harrison's building. Not to go inside, but to observe. For 3 consecutive days she sat in the park across from the building, pretending to read a book while memorizing schedules and routines. She discovered that Harrison left for his office every morning at 9 and only returned after 7 in the evening. She also discovered that the building had a strict security system, but that on Wednesday mornings a maintenance crew came to clean the exterior windows of the upper floors. "It's too risky," Marissa said when she heard the plan. "Mum, someone has to do something," Abigail replied. "And as Grandpa always says, sometimes the little people can go where the big ones can't. But you're a child, Abby. If something goes wrong, I'll run. I'm fast and small. But if we do nothing, he'll keep doing this to other people." Sebastian looked out the window, lost in thought. "You know something, girls? In the war, we had a saying, 'The enemy never expects you to attack where he feels safest.'" "What do you mean?" "Harrison Blackwood feels untouchable in his penthouse. That's exactly why we can surprise him." "Dad, you're not seriously thinking of—" "I'm thinking my granddaughter is right. And I'm thinking maybe it's time to show this man that there are no invisible people in the world, only people he chose not to see." That night, the 3 of them finalized the details of the plan. It was risky, required perfect timing, and depended on the courage of a 10-year-old girl. But it was also the only chance they had to get the evidence needed to expose Harrison's corruption. "Are you sure, Abby?" Sebastian asked before they went to sleep. "I'm sure, Grandpa. Remember what you taught me about doing the right thing. That doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." "Exactly. And this is the right thing." Sebastian kissed his granddaughter's forehead. "Then tomorrow, we start showing Mr. Blackwood that he chose the wrong family to humiliate." As the house fell into the silence of the night, Abigail lay in her bed looking at the ceiling and mentally reviewing every detail of Harrison Blackwood's penthouse layout. Her photographic memory allowed her to visualize every room, every piece of furniture, every possible hiding place. Tomorrow would be the day. Tomorrow, the invisible girl would become visible in a way Harrison Blackwood could never imagine. Across the city, Harrison slept soundly in his king-size bed, surrounded by the silence he so cherished. He had no idea that, at that very moment, 3 people in a small apartment in the Bronx were planning the first move in a game that would change his life forever. The war was just beginning, and this time, the giant didn't know he was fighting an army. Wednesday dawned overcast in New York City, with that characteristic humidity that precedes a summer storm. Abigail woke up at 5 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual, with her heart pounding. It wasn't exactly fear, but the adrenaline of someone who knows they are about to do something that could change everything. Sebastian was already awake in the kitchen, making coffee. At 68, his body still carried the military habits from decades ago. Wake up early, maintain discipline, always be prepared. When he saw his granddaughter appear at the kitchen door, he smiled discreetly. "Ready for the mission, Private Jones?" "Ready, General Grandpa." It was a game the two had played since Abigail was little, but today it carried a different weight. Today it wasn't just a game. Marissa appeared a few minutes later, visibly nervous. She had slept poorly, waking up several times during the night with nightmares about her daughter being arrested or worse. But when she looked at Abigail and Sebastian, she saw a determination that made her realize she couldn't dissuade them. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked one last time. "Mom?" Abigail approached and held her hand. "Remember when you used to tell me stories about Grandma Helen? About how she helped hide people during the McCarthy era, even though she knew it was dangerous?" Marissa nodded. Her mother, who had passed away 5 years ago, had been a brave woman who never stayed silent in the face of injustice. "You always said she did it because she believed some things are more important than fear. Today, I understand what that means." "She was right," Sebastian added, placing a hand on Marissa's shoulder, "and our Abby inherited that spirit from her." At 7 in the morning, the trio left the apartment in the Bronx. The plan was simple in its essence, but complex in its details. Abigail had observed that on Wednesdays, between 9:30 and 10:30 in the morning, the window cleaning crew worked on the upper floors of Harrison's building. During this period, the security's attention would be focused on monitoring the workers, creating a window of opportunity. Sebastian had managed to borrow delivery uniforms from a friend who worked for a courier company. The plan was for him and Abigail to pose as a father and daughter, making a special delivery to the 40th floor. Once inside the building, Abigail would use her small stature and knowledge of the layout to get to Harrison's apartment. "Remember what we agreed," Sebastian said on the subway. "If something goes wrong, you run. Don't try to help me, don't try to explain anything. You run and go straight to the meeting point." "I understand, Grandpa. And if anyone asks you anything?" "I'm your granddaughter, helping with deliveries during the school holidays, and I'm taking a very important document to Mr. Blackwood." "Perfect." They arrived at the building at 9:15. As predicted, the window cleaning crew was setting up their equipment on the exterior. The extra movement in the building created exactly the distraction they needed. Sebastian approached the reception desk with the confidence of someone who did this every day. "Good morning, I have an urgent delivery for Mr. Harrison Blackwood, apartment 4001. The receptionist, a young man who seemed more interested in the movement of the window cleaners than in his own job, barely looked at them. "Document." Sebastian showed a sealed envelope addressed to Harrison. Inside was just a blank sheet of paper, but the envelope looked official. "You can leave it here and I'll deliver it." "I can't, sir. Specific instructions, hand delivery only. It's about a very important lawsuit." The mention of a lawsuit made the receptionist hesitate. Wealthy people like Harrison Blackwood were always involved in legal matters, and he didn't want to be responsible for delaying something important. "All right. You'll have to sign the visitor's log and wear these ID badges." Sebastian signed in as Joseph Smith and Abigail as Maria Smith. The receptionist didn't even check if the names matched the IDs Sebastian had shown. In the elevator, Abigail felt her stomach flutter, but not from nervousness. It was pure excitement. For weeks she had planned every second of this moment, and now she was finally putting the plan into action. 40 floors, Sebastian murmured as the doors closed. 40 floors to justice, Abigail completed. The elevator stopped on the 40th floor with a soft ding. There was only one door in the hallway, the entrance to Harrison's penthouse. Sebastian rang the doorbell, knowing there would be no answer. Harrison was at his office, as he always was at that time. "No one's home," he said aloud, just in case anyone was listening. "That's strange. Mr. Blackwood scheduled it for this time." That's when Abigail put the riskiest part of the plan into action. During her weeks in the house, she had observed that Harrison kept a spare key in a place he thought was secret, inside a small compartment in the planter next to the door, a hiding spot he thought was clever, but which was all too obvious to a mind like Abigail's. In seconds, she located the key and opened the door. Sebastian looked both ways down the hall, making sure no one was watching, and the two slipped inside quickly. "You have 20 minutes, Sebastian said, looking at his watch. "If Harrison changes his routine and comes back early, I need time to warn you and for us to get out." 20 minutes is enough." Abigail went directly to the office. Her photographic memory guided her through the corridors like an internal GPS. She knew every corner of that apartment better than Harrison himself because she had paid attention to details he considered irrelevant. The office was exactly as she remembered. The dark mahogany walls, the imposing glass desk, the shelf full of trophies and recognition plaques, and there, behind, the desk, the Pollock painting that hid the safe. Abigail carefully removed the painting and was faced with the electronic safe. She had watched Harrison open that safe dozens of times during her secret visits to the library, always thinking he was alone. Her photographic memory had recorded not only the numbers he typed, but also the patterns of his finger movements. 7, 4, 1, 9, 6 to 2. The safe emitted a soft beep and opened. Inside was exactly what she expected to find. Organized folders with documents, flash drives, and some expensive jewelry. But she wasn't interested in the jewelry. Her attention turned to a specific folder marked Aurora Confidential Documentation. With quick, precise movements, Abigail began to photograph each document with the borrowed smartphone Sebastian had arranged. Her memory had already recorded everything, but they needed physical proof. Over-invoiced contracts, spreadsheets with real versus declared values, emails exchanged between Harrison and public officials, proof of bank transfers to offshore accounts. It was exactly what they suspected, but much worse. The corruption scheme was not limited to Project Aurora. At least 6 major public works projects were involved, with total over-invoicing reaching over $50 million. "Abby," Sebastian's voice echoed through the apartment, low but urgent. "You need to finish now." She photographed the last documents, put everything back exactly as it was, and closed the safe. She hung the painting back in its original position and ran out of the office. What happened? Harrison just got in the elevator. The doorman called to say he forgot something and is coming back up. Abigail's heart pounded. They had 3 minutes at most before Harrison reached the penthouse. "The key," she said, running toward the door. Sebastian was already in the hallway holding the door open. Abigail put the key back in the secret compartment of the planter, and the two of them hurried to the service elevator, which Abigail knew was at the end of the hall. They entered the service elevator just as they heard the ding of the main elevator opening. Through the small glass window of the service elevator, Abigail saw Harrison walking down the hall toward his door, talking on his phone about some contract he had forgotten to review. The service elevator descended silently as they heard the muffled sound of Harrison entering his penthouse. When they reached the ground floor, they exited through the service entrance, at the back of the building. "We did it," Sebastian said, breathing heavily. "We did it," Abigail confirmed, clutching the phone with the photographs as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. 20 minutes later, they were in a cafe 6 blocks away, connecting the phone to the borrowed laptop and transferring the photos to a flash drive. As the images appeared on the screen, Sebastian shook his head in disbelief. "This is much more serious than we imagined," he murmured. "What do we do now?" "Now we need to decide how to use this information safely. Harrison Blackwood is not just corrupt, he's dangerous. And when he finds out someone has this proof, he won't stop until he finds out who it is." Abigail looked at the photographs on the screen. Each document represented not only evidence of corruption, but also families who could have had better homes, better schools, better hospitals if that money hadn't been stolen. "Grandpa, do you think Grandma Helen would be proud of us today?" Sebastian smiled and placed his hand on his granddaughter's head. "I think she would be saying exactly what she always said. Courage is not the absence of fear, but doing the right thing even when you're afraid." "Then let's do the right thing." "We will, my dear, but very carefully. The game has now completely changed." Across the city, Harrison Blackwood reviewed his contracts in his penthouse office, with no idea that his life was about to change forever. The man who believed the world was divided between those who take and those who are taken from was about to discover that he had completely underestimated a 10-year-old girl. Abigail and Sebastian returned home, carrying not only the proof, but also the certainty that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. From that moment on, they were no longer just victims of Harrison's arrogance. They were adversaries on equal footing. And the battle was just beginning. That night, As they organized the evidence and planned their next steps, Abigail asked a question that would remain etched in Sebastian's memory forever. "Grandpa, do you think Mr. Blackwood will remember me when he finds out who's behind this?" "Oh, my dear," Sebastian replied, with a smile that mixed pride and concern, "he will never be able to forget you." A week had passed since the infiltration of Harrison Blackwood's penthouse. 7 days during which Abigail, Sebastian, and Marissa lived in constant tension, knowing they held information that could destroy one of the most powerful men in New York City. The home in the Bronx had transformed into an operations center. Spread across the kitchen table were printed copies of the photographed documents, notepads with connections between names and companies, and maps showing the location of each public works project involved in the corruption scheme. Sebastian, with his wartime experience, had taken on the role of strategist. "We can't just hand this over to the police," he explained to Marissa. "Blackwood has connections everywhere. Half the detectives and judges who would receive these complaints are probably in his pocket." "So what do we do?" Marissa asked, growing more worried each day about the risks they were taking. "We need someone we can trust in the press," Abigail said, looking up from the documents she was studying. "Someone who isn't afraid to confront powerful people." It was Sebastian who remembered Carla Mitchell, an investigative journalist he had met decades ago when she was just a young reporter, covering social issues in the outer boroughs. Carla now worked for one of the country's leading newspapers and had a reputation for being incorruptible. "Do you think she'll see us?" Marissa asked. "Carla has always been a decent person, and if she's still the same woman I knew, she'll want to hear what we have to say." On Thursday morning, Sebastian called the newspaper's newsroom. When he finally got through to Carla, he identified himself and requested an urgent meeting. Curious about what an old acquaintance could want after so many years, she agreed to meet them that afternoon. The newsroom was located in downtown Manhattan, in a modern building that contrasted with the surrounding colonial architecture. Carla Mitchell, now in her early 50s, maintained the determined posture and sharp gaze that Sebastian remembered. When she saw the trio enter her office, her eyes immediately fixed on Abigail. "Sebastian Jones," she said, shaking the old friend's hand, "you haven't changed a bit, and this must be your family." "My daughter Marissa, and my granddaughter Abigail. Carla, what we've brought you today could be the biggest story of your career." Carla smiled. "A promising start. Sit down and tell me everything." Sebastian began the narrative with the humiliation Marissa and Abigail had suffered at Harrison's home. Carla listened attentively, making occasional notes. When he got to the part about the infiltration of the penthouse and the evidence obtained, she stopped writing and stared at them intently. "Are you telling me that a 10-year-old girl broke into Harrison Blackwood's apartment and photographed documents from a safe?" "I didn't break in," Abigail corrected politely. "I used the key he kept in the planter, and it wasn't theft because I didn't take anything, I just photographed." Carla looked at the girl with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "And you remember everything you saw during those months working there?" "I remember every word, every document, every conversation. Would you like me to recount it?" For the next 2 hours, Abigail reported with precise detail everything she had witnessed. Names, dates, amounts, specific conversations. Carla, who had covered dozens of corruption cases throughout her career, had never seen a source with such precision. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, flipping through the copies of the documents. "If it's true—" "It's true," Sebastian said, "and we have the proof." Carla studied the documents for another hour, making calls to verify information and cross-reference data. When she finished, her expression was grave. "You know what you're getting into, don't you? Harrison Blackwood isn't just rich and powerful. He's dangerous. If he finds out you have this information—" "He'll try to silence us," Marissa said, verbalizing the fear they all felt. "That's why we need to act fast," Abigail intervened. "The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets." Carla looked at the girl with renewed respect. "You're 10 years old and you're talking like a military strategist." "I learned from the best," Abigail smiled, glancing at Sebastian. "All right, I'll investigate further and publish the story. But you, need to understand that from the moment this report comes out, your lives will change completely. Blackwood will move heaven and earth to find out who leaked this information." "We're prepared," Sebastian said. Carla worked day and night over the weekend, verifying every piece of information, contacting additional sources and building a solid, irrefutable report. On Monday morning, the newspaper's main headline blared, "Empire of Corruption, Tycoon Siphons, $50 million from Public Works." The story took up 5 full pages, with scanned documents, charts showing the diversion of funds, and statements from engineers who had noticed irregularities in the projects. Carla had protected the identity of her sources, referring only to information obtained from a reliable source close to the scheme. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the report had spread to every media outlet in the country. Social media buzzed with outraged comments about the over-invoicing that had stolen funds intended for public housing. Television programs convened experts to analyze the case. In his Midtown penthouse, Harrison Blackwood read the report for the 10th time, feeling a mixture of rage and panic he hadn't experienced in decades. His lawyers had already been summoned, his accountants were reviewing all records, and his phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from worried partners and politicians trying to distance themselves from the scandal. But what tormented him most was a question he couldn't get out of his head. Who had accessed the contents of his safe? "Only 5 people know the combination," he said to his head of security, Roger Price. "Me, my lawyer, my accountant, my ex-wife, and you." "Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, your most confidential documents shouldn't be accessible to so many people." "Don't give me lessons on security now, Roger. Tell me who did this." "I'm investigating. But given the level of detail in the report, whoever did this knows your home very well. They know your habits, your routine." An idea began to form in Harrison's mind. Someone who knew his house. Someone who had access for months. Someone who... "The cleaning lady," he said in a low voice. "Sir?" "Marissa Jones, the cleaning lady I fired 2 weeks ago. Her and that strange daughter." Roger consulted his notes. "I'll look into it. But, sir, even if they saw something, how could they have gained access to your safe?" Harrison remembered the conversation in the library. The girl reading quantum mechanics, talking about complex concepts with disconcerting naturalness, the mother mentioning a photographic memory. "Roger," he said, feeling a chill run down his spine, "that girl is different, very different. If she really has a photographic memory like her mother said, what are you suggesting, sir? That she might have observed much more than we imagined, and if she saw the combination to the safe..." The possibility was terrifying. For 3 months, a child with extraordinary mental capabilities had roamed his home, observing, memorizing, absorbing information, and he had treated her as invisible. "Find them," Harrison ordered. "I want to know where they are, who they talk to, what they do. I want to know everything about that family." Meanwhile, in the apartment in the Bronx, the Jones family lived with a mix of triumph and apprehension. The report had had exactly the impact they had hoped for, but they all knew that retaliation would not be far behind. "Mom," Abigail said, watching the online comments about the report, "I think we did it." "Did what, my dear?" "Showed the world who Harrison Blackwood really is. Now he can no longer pretend to be an honest businessman." Marissa hugged her daughter, but her eyes were filled with worry. "And now, Abby, what happens when he finds out it was us?" "Now, my dear," Sebastian answered, looking out the living room window. "Now, we must be prepared for war." On Tuesday morning, the war began. Marissa was fired from the doctor's office where she was working temporarily. The official reason was budget cuts, but she knew the truth. Harrison had found out where she worked and used his influence to pressure the doctor. In the afternoon, Sebastian received an unexpected visit. 2 men in suits, identifying themselves as private investigators, wanted to ask a few questions about security matters related to Mr. Blackwood. "I have nothing to say," Sebastian replied, keeping the door only slightly ajar. "Mr. Jones, it would be better to cooperate." Mr. Blackwood is a powerful man and he doesn't like to be crossed. You can tell Mr. Blackwood that Sebastian Jones is not intimidated by threats. I've faced worse in the war." The men exchanged glances and walked away, but Sebastian knew they would be back. That night, gathered in the kitchen, the family discussed their options. "He's trying to pressure us," Marisa said. "First he made me lose my job. Now he's sending people here." "It's exactly what we expected," Abigail observed. "People like him always react this way when they're exposed." "But we can't just keep reacting," Sebastian added. "We need a plan to protect ourselves." "Grandpa," Abigail said, her eyes shining with a new idea. "What if instead of defending ourselves, we attack again?" "What do you mean?" "Harrison Blackwood thinks he can intimidate us because we're poor, because we're small. But what if we show him that we're not so small after all?" Sebastian smiled. His granddaughter was thinking like a true strategist. "What do you have in mind?" "Remember the conversation I overheard about the project in Queens? The one where he talked about buying up land before the official announcement of the project?" "Insider trading for real estate speculation," Sebastian murmured. "That's a federal crime. And I know exactly when and where he's going to have the next meeting about it." Marisa looked at the two of them with a mixture of pride and terror. Her 10-year-old daughter and her 68-year-old father were planning to take on one of the most dangerous men in New York City. "You've both gone completely mad," she said. "No, Mom," Abigail replied with the serenity that had become her trademark. "We've just learned to play his game, and we know how to play it better than he imagines." Outside, the rain began to fall, heralding an approaching storm. Inside the small house in the Bronx, 3 people planned the next move in a war that was just beginning. Harrison Blackwood had underestimated a 10-year-old girl. He would soon discover that this had been the biggest mistake of his life. The month of April brought a change in the New York City air. The first autumn rains washed over the city, and with them it seemed that all the hidden dirt was coming to the surface. Harrison Blackwood felt this change viscerally. His empire, built over decades on a foundation of power and intimidation, was crumbling like a house of cards. Carla Mitchell's first report had opened the floodgates. Other journalists, encouraged by the story's success, began their own investigations. The FBI opened an inquiry into the over-invoicing on public works projects. The district attorney's office convened a task force, and most tormenting of all, someone was continuing to leak precise information about his business dealings. In his midtown penthouse, Harrison paced like a caged tiger. His lawyers were in and out of the apartment daily, trying to contain the damage. His assets had been frozen by the courts. Politicians who once took his calls now pretended not to know him, and he still didn't know who was behind it all. "Roger," he said to his head of security, "tell me you have something on the Jones family." Roger Price consulted his notes with a grim expression. "Mr. Blackwood, what I've discovered will surprise you. Spit it out." "The girl, Abigail. Davis Jones is more than special. She's a prodigy. The health clinic where she has checkups has medical reports confirming an IQ over 200 and a perfect eidetic memory." Harrison felt his blood run cold. Eidetic memory? "She remembers everything she sees with photographic precision. Absolutely everything, Mr. Blackwood. And there's more. I spoke with her school teachers. Abigail solves university-level math problems, reads quantum physics books for fun, and according to the teachers, she understands concepts that PhDs take years to master." "That's impossible. Sir, I've seen the reports. She's real, and she was in your home for 3 months." Harrison sat down heavily in his armchair. The reality was finally crystallizing in his mind. For 3 months, a 10-year-old genius had observed his every move, every conversation, every document in his home, and he had treated her like an insignificant child. "What else did you find out?" "The grandfather, Sebastian Jones, is a war veteran, fought with the U.S. Army in Italy during World War II. After the war, he worked in construction, always had a reputation as an honest and brave man. The mother, Marisa, is known in the neighborhood as a tireless worker, always fighting to give. Her daughter a better education." "And now?" "Now, Mr. Blackwood, they know exactly what you've done, and they're not willing to stay quiet." Harrison stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Below, the city stretched out as always, but he no longer felt in control. For the first time in his life, someone had turned the tables on him. "I want you to find them. I want you to bring them here. It's time we had a face-to-face conversation." "Sir, that could be very risky. If they report, 'Roger, my world is collapsing. I have to try something.'" In the apartment in the Bronx, the Jones family was living through tense but determined days. Carla's second report had come out the previous week, this time exposing the scheme of buying land with insider information. The evidence, once again provided by Abigail's prodigious memory, was irrefutable. "Mom," Abigail said, studying news about the case on the internet, "I think it's working." "What's working?" "Justice. He's losing all the power he had." Sebastian, who was listening to the conversation from the kitchen, approached them. "Abby, you know this isn't going to end here, don't you? Men like Blackwood don't give up easily." "I know, Grandpa. But I also know we can't go back now." "And we won't," Marisa said, surprising them both with the firmness in her voice. "My daughter has taught me something these past few weeks. She taught me that no matter how small we are, we can always make a difference." It was at that moment that the doorbell rang. Sebastian looked through the peephole and saw two men in suits in the hallway, the same ones who had visited before. "It's them again," he whispered. "What do we do?" Marisa asked, instinctively pulling Abigail closer to her. "This time I'll answer," Abigail said to everyone's surprise. "No, Abby, that's dangerous. Grandpa, from the beginning you've treated me like an adult because I think like one. Let me act like one now." Before anyone could stop her, Abigail opened the door. The two men seemed genuinely surprised to be confronted by a child. "Good afternoon," she said politely. "I imagine you're Mr. Blackwood's investigators." How did you... You know, you're not very discreet. You've been watching our house for a week, asking questions about us in the neighborhood." Abigail smiled, but there was something in her eyes. That unnerved the men. "What can I do for you?" Roger quickly composed himself. "Miss Abigail, I presume? My name is Roger Price. I work for Mr. Blackwood. He would very much like to speak with you and your family." "Speak about what?" "About misunderstandings. About how to resolve this situation amicably for everyone." Abigail exchanged a look with Sebastian, who had positioned himself behind her. They had anticipated this moment. "All right," she said. "Tell Mr. Blackwood that I agree to speak with him." "Abby," Marisa exclaimed. "But on one condition," Abigail continued. "The conversation will be in a public place. Let's say in the square by our church, tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon, and he comes alone." Roger hesitated. "Miss, I don't know if those are the conditions. You can relay the message." She closed the door gently, leaving the two men standing outside. "Have you lost your mind?" Marisa asked as soon as the door was closed. "No, Mom. It's time to end this once and for all." The next morning, Harrison Blackwood woke up with a strange feeling. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel in control, but he also didn't feel afraid. There was something almost liberating about finally going to face his adversaries head-on. At 3 in the afternoon, he parked his armored Mercedes in front of St. Anthony's Church in the Bronx. It was the first time in decades he had set foot in such a simple area. The small houses, the narrow streets, the children playing on the sidewalk. It all seemed like an alien world to him. In the square in front of the church, he found what he was looking for. Sebastian, Marisa, and Abigail were sitting on a bench under a large tree. A few local residents watched, from a distance, curious about the well-dressed man in an expensive car. Harrison approached slowly. Up close, the family seemed even more ordinary than he remembered. But when his eyes met Abigail's, he felt that disconcerting sensation again. The girl's eyes had an intensity that did not belong to a child. "Mr. Blackwood," Abigail said, standing up politely, "thank you for accepting our invitation." "Our invitation? You're the one who set the conditions." "That's true. Please, have a seat." Harrison hesitated for a moment, then sat on the bench opposite them. It was surreal. One of the most powerful men in America, sitting in a simple square negotiating with a working-class family. "I'll be direct," he said. You have information that belongs to me, information that is being used to harm me." "Information about your crimes," Sebastian corrected. "Alleged crimes. Nothing has been proven." "Not yet," Abigail said. "But it will be. Because the truth always comes out." Harrison stared at her intently. "You're 10 years old. What can you possibly understand about the real world? I understand that you believe some people are born to serve and others to be served. I understand that you use that philosophy to justify stealing money meant for public housing. I understand that you treated me as invisible because you thought I didn't matter." "You didn't matter. But I matter now, don't I?" Harrison couldn't answer immediately. The question had hit the exact point that had been tormenting him. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "We want you to stop," Marissa said. "Stop trying to intimidate us, stop trying to harm us, and accept the consequences of what you've done." "And in return?" "In return for nothing," Abigail replied. "We are not here to negotiate, Mr. Blackwood. We are here for you, to understand one very simple thing." "What thing?" "That there are no invisible people. There are only people you chose not to see, and sometimes the people you don't see are the very ones who can bring your world crashing down." Harrison felt something burn in his chest. Anger, humiliation, but also something he was slow to recognize. Respect. This child had planned and executed his downfall with military precision. "You know I can make your lives very difficult," he said, in a last attempt at intimidation. "You can try," Sebastian answered calmly. "But remember one thing, Blackwood. I've faced Nazis in Italy. You don't scare me. And I've read about over 300 cases of corruption similar to yours," Abigail added. "I know exactly how this story ends. You can try to harm us, but you can't stop the investigation. You can't stop the press. You can't stop justice." Harrison was silent for a few minutes, observing the unlikely family that had destroyed his empire. Finally, he stood up. "You think you've won," he said. "We don't think," Abigail replied, standing up as well. "We know, because we learned something you never understood." "What?" "That true strength doesn't come from power or money. It comes from doing the right thing even when it's hard." Harrison looked at her for a long moment, then turned and walked toward his car. Before getting in, he stopped and looked back. "You'll remember me when you grow up," he said. "I remember everything, Mr. Blackwood. I always remember. But the difference between us is that I will use my memories to build good things. You used yours to destroy." Harrison got into his car and drove away, knowing he would never see that family again, but also knowing that he would never be able to forget the eyes of that 10-year-old girl who had taught him the hardest lesson of his life. 3 months later, Harrison Blackwood was sentenced to 16 years in prison for racketeering, bribery, money laundering, and bid rigging. His fortune was confiscated to repay the damages to the public treasury. The public housing units of Project Aurora were built with quality materials and within the original budget. 200 families gained access to decent housing thanks to the evidence provided by a girl no one had noticed. And in a small house in the Bronx, Abigail Davis Jones continued to read her quantum physics books, always remembering her grandfather's words, "The greatest strength in the world is not in the hands of the powerful. It is in the courage of the small who are not afraid to do the right thing." 5 years later, the auditorium at Columbia University was packed. Students, professors, journalists, and curious onlookers squeezed in to hear the evening's lecture. Memory, Justice, and Social Transformation, delivered by Abigail Davis Jones, at 15, the youngest physics student in the university's history. In the first few years after the Blackwood case, as it became known in the papers, the Jones family's life changed drastically. The threats ceased once Harrison was imprisoned, but other transformations followed. The story of a 10-year-old girl who brought down an empire of corruption gained national and international attention. Scholarship offers arrived from universities in the US and abroad. Television producers wanted to buy the rights to the story. Publishers offered book deals. But Sebastian, with the wisdom of someone who had lived a long life, helped the family navigate these waters with caution. "Fame can be more dangerous than poverty," he would tell Abigail. "Don't let it change who you are." Marissa, for her part, had enrolled in a social work program inspired by the fight they had waged together. "If my daughter can change the world at 10, she would say, laughing, I can go back to school at 38. Now, 5 years later, Abigail took the stage at the Columbia Auditorium for her first public lecture on the case that had changed their lives. She had grown, but she retained the same intensity in her dark eyes and the same unsettling calm that had so impressed Harrison Blackwood. "Good evening," she began, her clear voice echoing through the auditorium. "My name is Abigail Davis Jones. I am 15 years old, and I want to tell you about the day I learned that there are no invisible people." For an hour, she recounted the story from the beginning. The humiliation at Harrison's house, the discovery of the corruption, the decision to act, the risks they took. But what was most impressive was how she connected her personal experience with broader issues of social justice and human dignity. "Many people ask me if I was afraid," she said at one point. "Of course I was. But my grandfather taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite the fear. And the right thing at that moment was to show that people like Harrison Blackwood are not untouchable." At the back of the auditorium, Sebastian, now 73, watched his granddaughter with pride. Beside him, Marissa smiled as she recorded the lecture on her phone. She had graduated with a degree in social work the previous year and now worked with underprivileged families, always remembering her own experience of struggle. "But what struck me most about this story," Abigail continued, "wasn't defeating Harrison Blackwood. It was discovering that when ordinary people unite for justice, they can move mountains. It was understanding that intelligence without compassion is useless, but compassion with intelligence can transform the world." After the lecture, during the question and answer session, a young journalist raised his hand. "Abigail, have you heard any news about Harrison Blackwood? Do you know how he is?" The question brought a momentary silence to the auditorium. It was the first time in 5 years that anyone had publicly asked about the man who had been the antagonist of her story. "Recently, yes," Abigail replied after a few seconds of reflection. "Harrison Blackwood is serving his sentence in a federal penitentiary in upstate New York. From the reports I've received, he uses his time in prison to study. He's teaching a literacy course for other inmates." Murmurs of surprise echoed through the auditorium. "Does that change your opinion of him?" the journalist pressed. "It changes my hope for him," Abigail answered thoughtfully. "For years, Harrison Blackwood believed the world was divided between those who take and those who are taken from. Perhaps in prison he is learning that there is a third category, those who serve. And that serving is not humiliation, it is dignity." Another question came from a sociology professor. "Abigail, you've become a symbol of resistance for many people. How do you handle that responsibility?" "Professor, I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted to do the right thing for my family. But if my story inspires other people to act against injustice, then it has served a purpose greater than I ever imagined." When the lecture ended, dozens of people approached to talk. Students wanted to take photos, professors offered research opportunities, social activists asked for advice. But the conversation that marked Abigail the most happened at the end of the night. A woman in her 40s approached hesitantly. She was accompanied by a girl of about 10 who looked at Abigail with clear admiration. "Sorry to bother you," the woman said. "My name is Fernanda, and this is my daughter Beatrice. We're going through a situation similar to what you went through." Abigail immediately gave the two her full attention. "Please, tell me." "My ex-husband is a councilman in the town where we live. He's involved in a scheme to embezzle funds from the school lunch program. I found out, but I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to report him because he has a lot of power in our town." Abigail looked at Beatrice, who was listening in silence. "And you, Beatrice, what do you think about this?" "I think the kids at my school deserve better food," the girl replied simply. "Some of my friends go hungry because the school food isn't enough. Do you have proof?" "I have some documents he left at home," Fernanda replied, "but I don't know if they're enough." "All proof is enough to start," Abigail said. I'll give you the contact information for the journalist Carla Mitchell. She will help you, and if you need any support, I'll be here." She handed her card to Fernanda, then knelt to be at Beatrice's level. "Beatrice, can I give you a piece of advice?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "Never let anyone convince you that you're too small to make a difference. Sometimes being small is exactly what you need to get into places where the big ones can't." Beatrice smiled, and Abigail saw in her a little of herself from 5 years ago. When they finally left the university, it was past 11 at night. In the car, the family talked about the lecture. "You did very well," Marisa said. "I was so proud." "Thanks, Mum. But do you know what made me happiest today?" "What?" "Beatrice, seeing that other children can have the courage to do the right thing." Sebastian, who was driving, smiled in the rearview mirror. "I think you planted a seed today, Abby." "I hope so, Grandpa." Back at the apartment in the Bronx, which was now renovated and expanded thanks to a research grant Abigail had received, the family gathered for Sebastian's nightly tea, a tradition they had always kept. "Grandpa," Abigail said, sitting on the floor at his feet as she had since she was a child, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my dear. Do you think we did the right thing? With Blackwood, I mean." Sebastian put his teacup on the table and looked at his granddaughter. "Why are you asking that now?" "Because today, during the lecture, I realized he was human too, that maybe we could have tried to talk to him before destroying his life." "Abby," Marisa joined the conversation, "you did try to talk, remember? He humiliated you, fired us, treated us like dirt." "I know, Mom, but what if we had insisted? What if we had given him a second chance?" Sebastian was thoughtful for a moment. "You know, Abby, in the war, I learned that sometimes we have to make difficult decisions with incomplete information. At the time, with the information we had, we did what we thought was right. But now I know that Harrison Blackwood was stealing money from schools, from hospitals, from public housing. Money that would have made a difference in the lives of thousands of people. Sometimes, stopping someone from doing evil is the greatest good we can do. But he's changing in prison, and that's wonderful," Sebastian interrupted gently. "It means our action not only stopped him from continuing to harm people, but also gave him a chance to become a better person. Sometimes, the consequences of our mistakes are exactly what we need to grow." Abigail nodded slowly. "So we did do the right thing." "You did the right thing," Marisa confirmed. "And you continue to do so every time you help people like Fernanda and Beatrice." That night, Abigail lay in her bed, looking at the stars through her bedroom window. In 5 years, she had gone from an invisible child to a young woman who inspired others to fight against injustice. She had learned that intelligence without purpose is empty, but intelligence in the service of justice can transform the world. In the federal prison, Harrison Blackwood finished another literacy class for his fellow inmates. He had discovered at 57 that teaching people to read was more gratifying than all the business deals he had closed in his previous life. Sometimes when he was alone, he thought of that 10-year-old girl who had changed his destiny. And for the first time, in decades, he felt something akin to gratitude. In the Bronx, in a small home that now housed one of the most brilliant future scientists in America, Sebastian said his nightly prayer. He gave thanks for the days he still had to watch his granddaughter grow, for the daughter who had become a strong and determined woman, and for the lesson that experience had taught him. That justice has no age, and that sometimes the small can teach the great how to be truly powerful. The next day, Beatrice and her mother sent documents about the school lunch embezzlement scheme to Carla Mitchell. 6 months later, the councilman was arrested and the children at the school began to receive proper meals. The cycle continued. The seed that Abigail had planted 5 years earlier continued to sprout, bearing new fruits of justice and hope. And on a Sunday morning, while walking along the Coney Island boardwalk to relax from her university studies, Abigail received a letter. The sender surprised her, H. Blackwood. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. "Dear Abigail, I know you will likely be surprised to receive this letter. I do not expect a response, nor do I seek forgiveness. I just want you to know that you were right. The world is not divided between those who take and those who are taken from. It is divided between those who build and those who destroy. I spent my life destroying, but you showed me that it is never too late to start building. Today I taught my 20th fellow inmate to read. Every time I see one of them read their first sentence, I remember you reading quantum mechanics in my library, and I understand that true intelligence lies in using our gifts to lift others up. Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for giving me a second chance even without knowing you were doing so. With respect and admiration, Harrison Blackwood. Abigail folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket. She looked out at the ocean, feeling the salty wind on her face, and smiled. Sometimes, she thought, justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. And at that moment, she knew her story was complete. Not because it had ended, but because it had become something bigger than herself. A symbol that anyone, no matter how small or invisible they may seem, can change the world when they decide to do the right thing. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Abigail, Sebastian, and Marisa has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of courage, determination, and justice, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most in this incredible narrative of overcoming adversity. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the extraordinary strength that exists within each of us. Stories that remind us that no matter our age, our social condition, or our origin, we all have the power to make a difference in the world. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, where a new story of transformation and hope awaits you.